Before we descend into the oldest story ever told, tell me, where are you listening from tonight? And what is the hour where you are? Settle into the darkness. Let the modern world fade away. Tonight we travel back to the very beginning, to the moment when they first touched this earth. They came from a dying world beyond the outer planets. They sought gold to save their atmosphere. They found something unexpected here, a planet rich with life, ripe for transformation. What follows is not mythology. It is memory, encoded in clay tablets over 6,000 years ago. This is the entire story of the Anunnaki, from their arrival to their departure, from the creation of humanity to the shadows where they now watch. Let your breath slow. Let your eyes grow heavy. And listen to the story that explains why you exist and who has been watching since the beginning. Long before Earth knew the footsteps of humanity, another world circled the same sun on a path so vast its year lasted 3,600 of our own. The Sumerians called this world Nibiru, the planet of crossing. Modern astronomers debate its existence, but the ancient tablets speak of it as fact. A world older than Earth, orbiting far beyond the visible planets, returning to the inner solar system in cycles measured not in generations, but in ages. Nibiru teemed with life, with civilization, with beings who had mastered technologies that would seem miraculous even by our modern standards today. The Anunnaki evolved there over millions of years, developing intelligence, society, and eventually the capability to leave their world and explore the stars. They were not gods in the religious sense, but to any lesser species, their knowledge and longevity would make them indistinguishable from the divine. But even advanced civilizations face existential threats. Nibiru's atmosphere began to deteriorate. The protective layer that shielded their world from cosmic radiation was thinning, damaged by geological processes or perhaps by their own technological advancement. Without intervention, their civilization faced extinction, not through sudden catastrophe, but through slow, inexorable decline. Their scientists proposed a solution. Gold, suspended in particulate form in the upper atmosphere, could reflect radiation and stabilize the atmospheric shield. But Nibiru's gold deposits had been exhausted over millennia of technological development. They needed to find gold elsewhere. They needed to find a world rich in the metal that could save them. And so they turned their attention outward, toward the inner solar system, toward a small blue world that their astronomers had catalogued but never visited. A world abundant in the very element they desperately needed. They called it Ki. We call it Earth. The first Anunnaki expedition arrived on Earth approximately 450,000 years ago. They came not as conquerors, but as miners, engineers, and scientists on a mission to extract gold and transport it back to Nibiru. Their leader was Enki, a prince of the Anunnaki royal house, renowned for his wisdom, his scientific knowledge, and his compassion. They established their first base in a region they called the Eden, a fertile area between two great rivers that would later be known as Mesopotamia. From there, they surveyed the planet, identified gold deposits, and began the work of extraction. The operation was massive in scale, requiring infrastructure that would transform the landscape of the ancient world. Enki and his crew discovered that Earth was not lifeless. It teemed with organisms, with creatures in various stages of evolution, including a species of primate that showed remarkable potential. But this was not their concern. They had come for gold, and gold they would extract. The indigenous life forms were curiosities, nothing more. For thousands of years, the operation proceeded according to plan. Gold was mined, processed, and shipped to Nibiru when the two planets' orbits brought them close enough for transit. But the work was brutal. Even with advanced technology, mining in Earth's heavier gravity, thicker atmosphere, and extreme conditions took its toll on the Anunnaki workers. Those assigned to the mines were not the elite scientists and commanders. They were the Igigi, a lower class of Anunnaki who performed the physical labor while their superiors oversaw operations from more comfortable installations. Generation after generation, the Igigi toiled in the gold mines of Africa, resentment building like pressure beneath the earth they excavated. After 40,000 years of continuous mining operations, the Igigi reached their breaking point. The work was endless, the conditions punishing, and the reward non-existent. They had been promised rotation back to Nibiru, but the need for gold was insatiable. They were slaves in all but name, their lives consumed by labor that benefited only those above them. The rebellion erupted without warning. The Igigi abandoned their posts, destroyed their tools, and marched on the command center where Enlil, Enki's half-brother and the mission's supreme commander, directed operations. Enlil was known for his strict discipline, his rigid adherence to hierarchy, and his belief that order must be maintained at any cost. The Igigi knew he would not negotiate, but they came anyway, their numbers overwhelming, their grievances undeniable. They surrounded Enlil's compound and demanded an end to their servitude. For the first time in the history of the Anunnaki presence on Earth, the mission faced collapse. Without workers, gold extraction would cease. Without gold, Nibiru would die. Enlil's instinct was to crush the rebellion with force. He was prepared to execute the leaders and conscript replacements from Nibiru. But such measures would take time they did not have, and the Igigi's complaints had reached sympathetic ears among the Anunnaki elite. Even some council members questioned whether the current system could continue. It was Enki who proposed the solution that would change everything. Rather than force the Igigi back to work or wait for replacements, why not create a new worker? Earth already possessed a species with potential, the primitive hominids that populated the African plains. With genetic manipulation, these creatures could be upgraded, enhanced, transformed into beings capable of performing the labor the Igigi refused to continue. The proposal was radical, unprecedented, and ethically questionable even by Anunnaki standards. Creating a new sentient species to serve as a slave labor force crossed boundaries that their civilization had never before approached. Enlil opposed it initially, concerned about the implications of bringing a new intelligence into existence solely to exploit it. But necessity overcame hesitation. The council approved Enki's plan, and work began immediately. Enki, assisted by Ninhursag, the chief medical officer, began the process of genetic engineering that would create humanity. They took the most promising hominid species, Homo erectus, and began modifying its genetic code splicing in Anunnaki DNA to enhance intelligence, physical capability, and most importantly, the capacity for following instructions. The process was not simple. Early attempts produced failures, beings that were malformed, mentally deficient, or unable to survive. The tablets describe these failed experiments in disturbing detail. Creatures that could not hold their urine, that could not close their eyes, that lacked essential functions. Ninhursag grew discouraged, but Enki persisted. Finally, after countless attempts, success. A being emerged that was neither fully Anunnaki nor fully hominid, but something new. A hybrid capable of understanding commands, performing complex tasks, and most crucially, reproducing naturally. They called this creation Lulu, the Mixed One. We know ourselves by a different name. The first humans were created in batches, gestated in the wombs of Anunnaki females who volunteered for this task. Each batch required direct involvement from the creators, making expansion slow and labor-intensive. But the Lulu proved capable workers, and soon they were replacing the Igigi in the mines, freeing the rebellious Anunnaki for other duties. The initial human design had a flaw, intentional from Enlil's perspective, problematic from Enki's. The Lulu could not reproduce on their own. Each new worker required creation through the same labor-intensive process, limiting how quickly the workforce could expand. Enlil viewed this as a safety feature, a way to maintain control over a potentially dangerous creation. Enki disagreed. He saw the Lulu not merely as tools, but as a new form of life, deserving of the same fundamental capacities as their creators. Secretly, he modified the genetic template, giving humanity the ability to reproduce naturally. The biblical story of the forbidden fruit is a distant echo of this moment, the granting of reproductive knowledge against the explicit wishes of the ruling authority. When Enlil discovered what Enki had done, his fury was immense. Humanity could now propagate without Anunnaki oversight, spreading across the planet, potentially growing beyond control. What had been a manageable workforce could become a rival civilization. Enlil demanded the modification be reversed, but it was too late. Humans were already reproducing naturally. This conflict between Enki and Enlil would define human history. Enki, who viewed humans as his children, worthy of knowledge and freedom. Enlil, who viewed humans as a necessary tool that must never be allowed to threaten Anunnaki supremacy. Their competing visions played out over millennia, shaping religions, cultures, and the very trajectory of human civilization. Humans multiplied rapidly, spreading beyond the mining operations into the surrounding lands. Some remained in service to the Anunnaki, working the mines and maintaining the installations. Others established their own settlements, developing primitive cultures that blended inherited Anunnaki knowledge with indigenous adaptation. The Earth was changing, and the change could not be reversed. As human populations grew, the Anunnaki established more sophisticated operations across the planet. The original base in the Eden expanded into a network of cities, each serving specific functions in the gold extraction and processing operation. These were not human cities, but Anunnaki installations, where humans served as workers and servants. Eridu was the first, established by Enki as his personal domain. Here he conducted his research, experimented with genetics and other sciences, and maintained the closest relationship with the human population. The humans who served at Eridu were treated relatively well, educated in basic Anunnaki knowledge, and allowed certain freedoms unknown elsewhere. Nippur was Enlil's center of power, the administrative capital from which he commanded all operations on Earth. Here discipline was strict, hierarchy absolute, and humans were reminded constantly of their place in the order of things. Nippur was also the communications hub, maintaining contact with Nibiru and coordinating the activities of all Anunnaki installations. Sipar served as the spaceport, the location where shuttles arrived from and departed to the orbiting stations that connected Earth to Nibiru. Bad Tabira processed the gold, refining it to the precise specifications required for atmospheric dispersal. Larak monitored the installations, while Shirapak served as the medical center, where Ninhursag continued her work. Each city was ruled by an Anunnaki lord, a member of the royal or noble class who answered to the Supreme Council. These lords became the gods of later human memory, their names and attributes preserved in myths long after their original meaning was forgotten. The cities they built became the models for human civilization, patterns that would be replicated as humanity spread across the world. As humanity multiplied, the Anunnaki faced a new challenge. Monitoring a growing population across an expanding territory required resources they could not spare from gold operations. The solution was delegation. Selected Anunnaki were assigned to observe human settlements, ensure continued productivity, and prevent developments that might threaten the mission. These observers became known as the Watchers, beings who lived among or near human populations, rarely intervening directly, but always present. They reported to the Council on human activities, technological developments, and social organization. They were the eyes and ears of Anunnaki authority in a world growing increasingly complex. Some Watchers maintained strict professional distance, viewing their charges as livestock to be managed. Others developed relationships with humans, finding in them qualities that surprised and intrigued. A few went further still, taking human partners and producing hybrid offspring that carried more Anunnaki genetic material than the standard human template. These unions were forbidden by Enlil's decree, but they occurred nonetheless. The offspring of Watcher and human unions were exceptional beings, larger, stronger, longer-lived, and more intelligent than standard humans. The tablets call them Nephilim, the fallen ones, or the giants. Later traditions would remember them as heroes, demigods, the mighty men of old. The existence of the Nephilim created social disruption. They did not fit neatly into either Anunnaki or human society. Too human to be accepted as equals by the Anunnaki, too exceptional to live as ordinary humans, they became a class unto themselves. Some became great leaders, ruling human settlements with knowledge inherited from their Anunnaki parents. Others became tyrants, exploiting their advantages for personal gain. As generations passed, human civilization developed in ways the Anunnaki had not anticipated. The knowledge shared by sympathetic Anunnaki, combined with human creativity and the enhanced capabilities of the Nephilim, produced rapid advancement. Humans were learning faster than expected, developing technologies that had not been authorized, asking questions that were not supposed to be asked. More troubling to the Council was the moral degeneration they observed. Human societies were becoming violent, exploitative, and corrupt. The Nephilim used their advantages to dominate rather than lead. Human rulers imitated Anunnaki behaviors without understanding the contexts that governed them. The creation that was meant to serve had become a problem. Enlil viewed this corruption as confirmation of his original concerns. Humanity had been a mistake, a shortcut that was now producing consequences. The proper solution was elimination, starting over with a more controllable design, or abandoning the human experiment entirely. His arguments gained support among council members who saw human development as a threat rather than an asset. Enki defended his creation, arguing that corruption was not inherent, but learned, that humans had adopted the worst aspects of Anunnaki behavior because those were the aspects they observed most frequently. The solution was not elimination, but education. Not destruction, but guidance. His arguments found support among Anunnaki who had developed genuine affection for their human charges. The council remained divided, unable to reach consensus on humanity's fate. But a decision was coming, driven not by political deliberation, but by cosmic circumstance. Nibiru's orbit was bringing it closer to the inner solar system, and with that approach came gravitational effects that would determine the future of life on Earth. Anunnaki astronomers had long tracked Nibiru's orbital path and understood its effects on the solar system. Each passage through the inner system produced gravitational perturbations, shifting planetary orbits slightly, affecting tidal forces, and occasionally triggering geological instabilities. Most passages were survivable, requiring preparation, but not evacuation. But the approaching passage was different. Calculations indicated that Nibiru would pass closer to Earth than at any time since the Anunnaki arrival. The gravitational effects would be catastrophic. Ice sheets covering Antarctica would destabilize, sliding into the ocean and producing waves that would inundate coastal regions worldwide. No surface installation would survive. The council made its decision. Anunnaki personnel would evacuate to orbiting stations and high-altitude facilities until the catastrophe passed. Human populations, concentrated in low-lying areas where the gold operations were located, would not be warned. The flood would accomplish what the Council could not agree upon directly. Humanity would be eliminated by natural forces, and no Anunnaki would bear direct responsibility. Enlil demanded an oath of secrecy from all Council members. No Anunnaki would warn humans of the coming disaster. No preparations would be made to save human life. The creation would be uncreated, the mistake erased, and after the waters receded, the Anunnaki could decide whether to begin again with a new design or abandon the human experiment entirely. Enki took the oath, but he did not intend to keep it. These were his children, created from his knowledge and bearing his genetic contribution. He would not condemn them to extinction without warning, without giving them at least a chance to survive what was coming. But he had to be careful. Direct violation of the oath would bring severe consequences. Enki found a way to honor the letter of his oath while violating its spirit. He could not warn humanity directly, but he could speak to a wall while a human happened to be on the other side. The human he chose was Ziusudra, known in later traditions as Utnapishtim, and still later as Noah. A man known for his righteousness, his wisdom, and his devotion to Enki. Through the reed wall of his house, Ziusudra heard Enki's voice describing the coming catastrophe in precise detail. The ice would fall, the waters would rise, and all life on the lowlands would perish. but survival was possible for one who prepared properly. Enki described the construction of a vessel capable of riding out the flood, its dimensions, its materials, and what it must carry. The vessel would need to hold not just Ziusudra and his family, but the genetic material of Earth's species, seeds, breeding pairs, DNA samples preserved in ways that Anunnaki technology made possible. Humanity would survive through Ziusudra, and through him the work of creation would not be entirely lost. Ziusudra obeyed without question. He gathered his family, assembled the materials, and began construction while his neighbors mocked his apparent madness. Why would anyone build a massive boat in a region far from any body of water capable of using it? But Ziusudra trusted the voice he had heard, and he built according to specifications that would prove precisely adequate for what was coming. The construction took years, during which Ziusudra gathered everything Enki had specified: seeds of every cultivated plant, breeding pairs of domesticated animals, samples of wild species that could not be paired but whose genetic material could be preserved, and tablets, records of Anunnaki knowledge that would allow civilization to be rebuilt after the waters receded. When Nibiru reached its closest approach, the effects were immediate and catastrophic. The Antarctic ice sheet, destabilized by gravitational forces, slid into the Southern Ocean in a single, massive displacement. The resulting wave propagated northward at speeds no human could outrun, carrying walls of water that would reshape every coastline on the planet. Ziusudra and his family were sealed in the vessel when the waters came. For 40 days, by the later biblical account, the boat was tossed by storms and waves as the world outside drowned. Everything Ziusudra had known was being erased. Every city, every monument, every trace of the civilization the Anunnaki had built and humans had served. From their orbital stations, the Anunnaki watched the destruction. Ninhursag wept openly, mourning the creation she had helped bring into existence. Even Enlil, who had demanded the secrecy that made this catastrophe inevitable, was shaken by the scale of destruction. Whatever they had intended, the reality exceeded their imaginings. Enki watched too, hoping that his clandestine warning had been enough, that somewhere on the churning waters a single vessel carried the survival of his creation. He could not intervene, could not search, could only wait and trust that Ziusudra had built well and prepared adequately. When the waters finally began to recede, the world that emerged was unrecognizable. Coastlines had changed, river valleys were scoured clean, and the installations the Anunnaki had built over hundreds of thousands of years were gone. The gold operations would have to be rebuilt from nothing, and the workforce that had operated them was assumed to be extinct. Ziusudra's vessel came to rest on a mountain, exactly as Enki had calculated. When the waters receded enough to allow emergence, Ziusudra performed the first post-flood sacrifice, burning offerings that sent smoke rising into the atmosphere. The Anunnaki, monitoring the surface from orbit, detected this signal and descended to investigate. Enlil's fury at discovering humans had survived was immense. Someone had violated the oath, warned the humans, provided them with the means to escape the cleansing flood. His suspicion fell immediately on Enki, whose affection for humanity was well known. He demanded punishment, execution for the betrayal. But other voices spoke differently. Ninhursag argued that humanity's survival was a gift, not a crime. The genetic investment in creating humans was immense. To destroy them now, after they had demonstrated the capability to survive even cosmic catastrophe, would be wasteful beyond measure. Others agreed. Humanity had proven itself. Perhaps they deserved another chance. Enki defended himself cleverly, pointing out that he had not technically warned humans directly. He had spoken to a wall. If a human happened to be listening on the other side, that was hardly his responsibility. The argument was transparent, but it provided legal cover for those who wished to let the matter rest. Ziusudra was allowed to live, and with him, humanity continued. The council reconvened to decide what came next. The old order was gone, washed away with the cities and installations it had supported. A new approach was needed, one that acknowledged humanity's unexpected resilience while maintaining Anunnaki control over the resources they still needed to extract. The post-flood world was divided among the Anunnaki clans, each receiving territory to develop and govern as they saw fit. Enlil and his descendants received the Fertile Crescent, the region that would become Sumer, Akkad, and eventually Babylon. Enki received Africa, including the gold-bearing regions that remained the mission's primary focus. A third region, the Nile Valley, was assigned to Enki's son Marduk, whose ambition would eventually reshape the entire Anunnaki order. Other regions were distributed among lesser Anunnaki lords, creating a patchwork of divine territories that would be reflected in human geography and religion for millennia to come. The approach to humanity changed as well. Rather than treating humans simply as workers, the Anunnaki established themselves as gods, ruling their territories through human intermediaries they appointed and instructed. Kings were chosen to govern in the god's name, receiving knowledge and technology that set them apart from common humans. This system proved remarkably effective. Humans organized themselves into hierarchical societies that served Anunnaki interests without requiring constant divine presence. The gods could withdraw to their temples and installations, appearing only for major decisions or ceremonial occasions, while human administrators handled daily operations. The cities of Sumer rose from the mud, rebuilt on the models of their pre-flood predecessors, but now housing primarily human populations. Uruk, Ur, Eridu, Nippur. The ancient names returned, though their meanings shifted. These were no longer Anunnaki installations, but human cities under divine patronage, places where the gods were worshipped rather than served directly. What we call the birth of civilization was actually a restoration and transfer. The technologies that had taken the Anunnaki millennia to develop were given to humans in compressed form, producing the explosive advancement that archaeology records in ancient Sumer. Writing, mathematics, astronomy, agriculture, metallurgy, law, all appeared almost simultaneously because they were taught, not invented. The Anunnaki selected priests and scribes for special education, training them in knowledge that would be passed down through temple traditions. These became the repositories of advanced understanding, maintaining the sciences of astronomy and mathematics that would allow humans to track the movements of the gods and predict their returns. The knowledge was not given freely or completely. Certain technologies remained exclusively Anunnaki, weapons and transportation systems that maintained their superiority. Other knowledge was shared in fragments, enough to be useful, but not enough to threaten. Humans received the gift of civilization, but the gift was carefully curated. This selective sharing created the stratified societies that characterized ancient civilizations. A small elite with access to divine knowledge ruled over masses who understood only what they needed to perform their functions. The pattern persists today in different forms, suggesting either cultural inheritance or ongoing influence from the same source. The Anunnaki also introduced the concept of divine kingship, the idea that rulers governed by divine appointment and possessed qualities that set them apart from ordinary humans. Kings were often hybrids, carrying more Anunnaki DNA than the general population, their exceptional abilities serving as evidence of divine favor. Peace among the Anunnaki lasted only briefly in the New Order. The division of territories had created competing power centers, and the old rivalry between Enlil's and Enki's lineages soon resurfaced. Disputes over boundaries, resources, and human populations escalated into conflicts that would be remembered as the Wars of the Gods. Marduk proved particularly ambitious. Not content with Egypt, he sought to expand his influence into territories assigned to his rivals. His conflicts with the Enlilite faction produced devastation that human populations experienced as divine wrath. Cities were destroyed, populations scattered, and the landscape itself was scarred by weapons whose nature can only be guessed from the destruction they caused. The texts describe weapons that sound disturbingly modern. Brilliance like 1,000 suns, shadows burned into stone, lands rendered uninhabitable for generations. Whether these were nuclear weapons, directed energy systems, or something else entirely, their effects transformed the regions where they were deployed. The destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah may record one such deployment. Cities annihilated in fire from the sky for reasons that had more to do with geopolitical positioning than moral failure. The Dead Sea region still shows anomalies consistent with extreme heat exposure, though conventional archaeology offers different explanations. These conflicts caused massive human suffering, populations destroyed or displaced as collateral damage in divine disputes. The gods' human followers fought alongside their patrons, dying in wars whose causes they barely understood. Human history became entangled with Anunnaki politics, our fate determined by rivalries that predated our creation. The conflicts culminated in Marduk's eventual triumph. Through military victory, political manipulation, and simple persistence, he rose to become the supreme god of Babylon, the greatest human city of its age. The older gods did not disappear, but were subordinated, their roles diminished, their worship redirected toward the victor. The Babylonian creation epic, the Enuma Elish, records this theological revolution. Marduk defeats the primordial forces of chaos and creates the world from their remains. The older gods acknowledge his supremacy and assign him titles that had belonged to their own traditions. It is propaganda as much as mythology, recording political victory as cosmic truth. Marduk's rise marked a transition in Anunnaki governance. The older generation was withdrawing, returning to Nibiru, or retreating from active involvement in human affairs. Younger gods like Marduk represented a new approach, more willing to intervene directly, more interested in worship and obedience than the subtle management their predecessors had practiced. But Marduk's triumph also planted seeds of eventual withdrawal. The conflicts that had enabled his rise demonstrated that continued Anunnaki presence on Earth was becoming counterproductive. Their disputes caused destruction that interfered with gold extraction. Their rivalries created chaos that threatened the stability of human civilization. Perhaps it was time for a different approach. The council debated withdrawal over centuries, each Nibiru passage providing an opportunity to reduce presence or maintain it. Gradually, the consensus shifted toward disengagement. Humanity had proven capable of maintaining civilization without constant oversight. The gold operations could be monitored from distance. Direct rule was no longer necessary. The Anunnaki did not leave suddenly. Their withdrawal was a process spanning millennia, a gradual reduction of presence that left humans increasingly responsible for their own affairs. The gods appeared less frequently, spoke less directly, and eventually fell silent entirely, at least in public. What humans experienced as the decline of the age of gods was actually a planned transition. Oracles that had once spoken with divine voices fell silent. Temples that had housed living gods became monuments to absent ones. The certainty of divine presence faded into the hope of divine return. But withdrawal did not mean departure. The Anunnaki reduced their visible presence while maintaining hidden influence. The Watchers remained, observing human development, reporting to authorities who no longer interacted directly with human populations. The gold operations continued under new management, using human proxies who did not know whom they ultimately served. Mystery traditions emerged to preserve knowledge that was no longer publicly taught. Secret societies claimed lineages tracing back to the gods themselves. These traditions maintained connections that official religion no longer acknowledged, serving as channels through which Anunnaki influence could continue to operate. The transition was not uniform across all regions. Some areas retained divine presence longer than others. Egypt's pharaonic tradition maintained closer Anunnaki connections than Mesopotamia's later empires. The Americas may have received late Anunnaki visitors, explaining the sudden emergence of complex civilizations in regions without prior development. As millennia passed, the Anunnaki presence became increasingly subtle, shifting from open rule to hidden influence, from visible gods to invisible hands. They watched from shadows that grew deeper with each generation, their involvement becoming harder to detect, easier to deny, but no less real. Human civilizations rose and fell, each believing itself unique, each unaware of the patterns connecting its story to all the others. The same themes repeated: creation from divine source, a golden age of direct contact, a fall or departure, and the hope of eventual return. These patterns persist because they describe real events filtered through cultural interpretation. The Anunnaki interests did not change with their visibility. They still needed gold, still monitored human development, still intervened when necessary to protect their investment or prevent threats from emerging. But their methods evolved, adapting to human advancement, using systems humans themselves had created to maintain control. Financial systems trace their origins to Anunnaki economic structures, methods of resource allocation and debt management that served the gold operations. These systems were passed to human administrators, who developed them according to patterns their creators had established. The modern banking system, with its creation of value from nothing, echoes techniques the Anunnaki employed millennia ago. Political structures similarly carry Anunnaki fingerprints. Hierarchy, bureaucracy, the division of labor, and specialization all derive from organizational models the Anunnaki introduced. Human societies developed along lines that had been laid down before human consciousness existed to choose differently. The Watchers never left. Even as the greater Anunnaki withdrew to Nibiru or to hidden installations on Earth, the Watchers maintained their vigil, observing humanity's development and reporting to authorities who remained engaged, even if invisible. Their presence explains the persistent human sense of being observed, the feeling that something watches from just beyond perception. This is not paranoia, but accurate detection of an actual phenomenon. We feel watched because we are watched, have always been watched, will continue to be watched as long as we exist. The Watchers adapted their methods as human technology advanced. Where once they could observe openly, appearing as angels or spirits to those who noticed them, they now had to be more careful. Human surveillance technology could potentially detect what should remain hidden. Human communication systems could spread information that should remain contained. And yet, detection occurs. Throughout history, individuals have reported encounters with beings that match Anunnaki descriptions. Tall entities, associated with advanced technology, communicating information about human destiny and cosmic cycles. These encounters are dismissed as delusion or fabrication, but their consistency suggests a phenomenon that demands better explanation. Modern encounter reports, the beings associated with UAP phenomena, often match ancient descriptions of Anunnaki and their subordinate entities. This is either remarkable coincidence or evidence of continuous presence. The Watchers may have adapted their appearance, but their function remains unchanged. If the Anunnaki remained on Earth, they would need infrastructure to support that presence. Facilities for housing, for communication, for the technology that maintains their extended lifespans. Such facilities would need to be hidden from human detection while remaining accessible to their operators. Underground installations offer ideal concealment. The Earth's crust provides shielding from detection methods, protection from surface conflicts, and stable environments regardless of climate variations. Ancient traditions of underground realms, from the Sumerian Abzu to modern accounts of subterranean bases, may describe actual facilities rather than imaginary spaces. The oceans offer similar advantages. Covering most of the planet's surface and largely unexplored, the deep ocean could harbor installations that human technology cannot detect. Reports of unidentified submersible objects, craft that operate underwater with capabilities exceeding human technology, suggest something operates in the depths that official sources do not acknowledge. Space provides a third option. Orbital platforms or lunar installations could house Anunnaki presence beyond Earth's surface while maintaining observation capability. The persistent interest in certain lunar regions, combined with anomalous observations that space agencies dismiss without adequate explanation, hints at activity that is not supposed to be visible. These facilities would require resources and logistics, supply chains that operate without human awareness. energy sources that do not appear in our accounting. Perhaps they tap power sources we have not discovered. Perhaps they have arrangements with human institutions that believe they serve other purposes. Understanding the Anunnaki requires adjusting our temporal perspective. Beings who measure time in cycles of 3,600 years do not think as we do. What seems ancient to us may seem recent to them. What seems permanent to us may seem temporary from their vantage. From their perspective, human civilization is young, a few heartbeats in the cosmic scale they inhabit. Our entire recorded history fits within 2 of their years. Our technological revolution is a moment. Our global conflicts, minor turbulence in a longer trajectory, they observe with patience we cannot imagine. This temporal difference explains apparent contradictions in their behavior. Why do they not intervene more directly in human affairs? Because from their perspective, they intervened yesterday. Why do they allow human suffering to continue? Because from their perspective, it will end tomorrow. Their patience exceeds our comprehension because their timeline exceeds our experience. The SAR, the 3,600-year cycle, corresponds to Nibiru's orbit around the Sun. Each passage brings the possibility of direct contact, the return of those who departed to inspect what has developed in their absence. The last passage occurred in the era of Babylon's fall. The next approaches within centuries, possibly within generations. Human traditions of divine return may preserve genuine knowledge of this cycle. The promise that the gods will come again, that judgment will occur, that the current order will be transformed. These expectations may reflect actual anticipated events rather than mere wishful thinking. If the Anunnaki story is true, it transforms how we understand ourselves. We are not random evolutionary products, but designed beings created for specific purposes by entities who remain involved in our development. Our capabilities and limitations were engineered, not evolved. Our potential is not infinite, but defined by the parameters of our creation. This need not diminish human dignity. Children do not become less valuable upon learning they were intentionally created by parents. The designed nature of our existence does not reduce our worth. It may, in fact, increase it. We were wanted, planned, brought into being through deliberate effort. That is a form of love, however complicated. But it does raise questions about autonomy. If we were created to serve, to what extent can we choose other purposes? If our development is monitored and occasionally adjusted, to what extent are we truly free? These questions have no easy answers, but they deserve honest consideration rather than reflexive dismissal. The Anunnaki story also suggests we are not alone in ways that extend beyond simple extraterrestrial contact. We have creators who remain interested in our development, observers who watch our choices, and perhaps judges who will evaluate our progress. The universe is not indifferent to human fate. Something is invested in how this story ends. This investment could be benevolent or exploitative, protective or extractive. The genetic manipulation that created humanity was not a single event, but a process refined over thousands of years. Enki and Ninhursag experimented with different genetic combinations, seeking the optimal balance between intelligence sufficient to follow complex instructions and limitations that prevented independent development beyond acceptable parameters. The early Lulu were more limited than modern humans, designed for specific tasks rather than general capability. Over generations, the template was adjusted, enhanced, refined. These adjustments explain the apparent jumps in human development that puzzle conventional archaeology. The sudden emergence of anatomically modern humans, the rapid advancement of cognitive capability, the development of language and symbolic thought, all these mark moments when the Anunnaki genetic engineers released new versions of their creation, upgraded templates that replaced or absorbed earlier models. The diversity of human populations may also reflect different design batches, regional variants created for different purposes or by different Anunnaki engineers with slightly different approaches. The genetic distinctiveness of various human groups could be traced not merely to environmental adaptation, but to intentional variation in the original template. This possibility raises uncomfortable questions about human racial categories and their origins. Were some populations engineered for specific roles? Were some given capabilities others lacked? The Anunnaki approach to humanity was never egalitarian. Hierarchy was built into their system from the beginning. That hierarchy may be more literal than metaphorical. The Anunnaki understanding of genetics far exceeded anything human science has yet achieved. They could modify living organisms with precision, creating targeted changes that would express across generations. They understood epigenetics, the activation and deactivation of genes in response to environmental conditions. They could engineer not just bodies, but behaviors, building tendencies and limitations into the genetic code itself. Some researchers suggest that certain human psychological tendencies were deliberately engineered. The inclination toward hierarchy and obedience, the susceptibility to religious belief, the capacity for cognitive dissonance that allows contradictory beliefs to coexist, the tendency to form in-groups and out-groups. These characteristics served Anunnaki purposes, and their universality across human cultures suggests deep engineering rather than cultural development. The question of human free will becomes complex in this context. How free are choices made by beings engineered to make certain choices more likely? How autonomous are behaviors that emerge from genetic predispositions installed by designers? These are not merely philosophical questions, but practical ones about the nature of human experience. The mining operations that brought the Anunnaki to Earth continued long after humanity was created. Gold extraction remained the primary mission, and the infrastructure required to support it shaped the development of early human civilization. The cities that became the centers of Sumerian culture were not randomly located, but positioned according to the logistics of gold processing and transport. Trade routes that connected ancient civilizations often followed paths established by Anunnaki supply lines. The exchange of goods and ideas that characterized early civilization flowed through channels that had been carved out millennia before human merchants used them. We inherited infrastructure we did not build and whose original purposes we have forgotten. The gold itself raises questions. Where did it go? Millions of tons extracted over hundreds of thousands of years, processed, refined, and shipped off-world. The quantities boggle imagination, yet the evidence of extraction remains in ancient mines whose depths and sophistication exceed what primitive human technology could have achieved. Someone was mining gold on an industrial scale long before the emergence of human civilization. The Anunnaki relationship with gold was not merely economic, but existential. Their survival as a species depended on it. This desperation explains their willingness to travel interstellar distances, to invest millennia in developing a workforce, to risk everything on a project whose outcome was never guaranteed. Gold was not wealth to them, but medicine, the substance that would heal their dying world. Whether Nibiru was actually saved by the gold shipments remains unclear. The tablets focus on events on Earth, not on the homeworld. But the continued Anunnaki presence suggests their civilization survived, that the atmospheric rehabilitation worked, that the desperate mission achieved its primary objective. They paid an enormous price, but they received what they paid for. The temples of ancient Sumer were not merely places of worship, but functional installations serving purposes both spiritual and practical. They contained technologies that seemed miraculous to human observers, devices that could communicate across vast distances, that could heal injuries and cure diseases, that could predict future events with uncanny accuracy. These capabilities became the foundation of priestly power, evidence that the gods favored those who served in their houses. Temple economies dominated early civilization. The temples owned land, controlled labor, managed trade, and stored surplus against future need. This was not exploitation, but continuation of Anunnaki organizational models, systems that had proven effective over millennia and were simply transferred to human administration when the gods withdrew from daily management. The concept of taxation emerged from temple tribute, the portion of production owed to the gods who had given humanity everything it possessed. This was not theft, but acknowledgement of debt, recognition that humans existed because the Anunnaki had created them, and continued to exist because the Anunnaki permitted it. Gratitude was expressed through material offerings. The priesthoods that emerged became the primary channel through which Anunnaki knowledge passed to humanity. Priests learned writing, mathematics, astronomy, medicine, and the other sciences that the gods chose to share. They became the educated class, set apart from common humanity by their access to divine knowledge and their role as intermediaries between gods and men. This priestly monopoly on knowledge created the stratified societies that characterized ancient civilizations. Those who understood the mysteries ruled over those who did not. Education was not a right, but a privilege, granted to those who served the divine purpose and withheld from those who did not. Knowledge was power, and power was carefully controlled. The transition from many gods to fewer gods to one god tracks the consolidation of Anunnaki power and eventually their withdrawal. Polytheism reflects the period when multiple Anunnaki lords ruled their separate territories and demanded worship from their human subjects. As certain lords gained dominance, their cults absorbed the cults of their rivals. The theological shift toward monotheism mirrors the political shift toward empire. The Abrahamic religions emerged in this context, preserving Anunnaki concepts in new forms. The jealous God who tolerates no rivals echoes Marduk's consolidation of power. The covenant between God and chosen people echoes the relationship between Anunnaki lords and favored populations. The promise of divine return echoes the anticipated cycle of Nibiru's passage. These religions preserve genuine knowledge in symbolic form. The stories of creation, flood, and covenant are not fabrications but transformations, historical events filtered through centuries of retelling until their original meaning became obscured. The truth was never lost, only encoded in ways that protected it from those who should not understand, while preserving it for those who could. The prophetic traditions of these religions may record actual Anunnaki communications. Individuals who received divine messages may have been contacted by watchers, informed of plans and purposes they were to transmit to human populations. The prophets were not mad but privileged, granted access to information that most humans never received. The apocalyptic literature of various traditions, the Book of Revelation, the Book of Enoch, the Hindu yugas, all describe cycles of destruction and renewal that may reflect actual Anunnaki planning. These are not fantasies of religious imagination, but previews of intended future events, warnings embedded in tradition for those with ears to hear. The modern world emerged from foundations the Anunnaki laid. Our institutions, our technologies, our ways of organizing society, all descend from models established in ancient Sumer under divine guidance. We believe we invented these things, but we inherited them, developed them, refined them according to patterns that were set before our ancestors could read or write. The Industrial Revolution may have been prompted by more than human ingenuity. The sudden acceleration of technological development in specific places at specific times suggests coordination beyond what market forces or cultural dynamics would produce. Key inventions appeared when needed, discovered by individuals who may have received assistance they never recognized or acknowledged. The digital revolution follows similar patterns. Technologies that enable surveillance on unprecedented scale, communication that can be monitored and controlled, systems that bind humans to electronic networks from which extraction becomes increasingly impossible. These technologies serve purposes that may extend beyond their obvious applications, creating infrastructure whose full utility has not yet been revealed. The concentration of human population in urban centers facilitates control and monitoring. The dependence on technological systems for basic needs creates vulnerabilities that could be exploited. The financial structures that bind humanity in debt resemble nothing so much as the systems of obligation that temple economies established millennia ago. New names for old relationships. The entertainment systems that consume so much human attention serve functions beyond amusement. They shape consciousness, establish values, create desires that serve purposes beyond the satisfaction of those who experience them. The stories we tell ourselves through these media often echo ancient narratives in modern dress, reinforcing patterns of thought that serve ancient purposes. The educational systems that prepare humans for their roles in society perform similar functions. They do not primarily transmit knowledge, but establish habits of thought, patterns of obedience, acceptance of hierarchy and authority. The content of education matters less than its form. The training of minds to accept what they are told and perform the functions they are assigned. The political systems we inhabit, regardless of their nominal form, produce similar outcomes. Elites maintain power across supposed changes in government. Policies that serve certain interests advance, regardless of which party holds office. The appearance of choice masks the absence of meaningful alternatives. Democracy may be theater, the illusion of self-governance masking governance by others. If this analysis is correct, the Anunnaki have not withdrawn at all. They have simply changed their methods, moving from visible rule to invisible influence, from physical presence to systemic control. The shadows from which they watch are not geographical but structural, built into the systems that organize human life. Their goals may have evolved as well. Gold extraction may no longer be the primary concern if Nibiru's atmosphere has been stabilized, but humanity remains useful for other purposes. Our labor generates value that can be extracted through financial systems. Our attention generates energy that may have uses we do not understand. Our development produces innovations that the Anunnaki may find useful. We may be an investment that continues to pay dividends, a resource that has not been exhausted but continues to produce. Our creators have not abandoned their creation, but found new ways to benefit from it. The relationship has changed, but not ended. We remain connected to something larger than ourselves, even if we do not recognize the nature of that connection. The question of human purpose becomes acute in this context. If we were created to serve, what is our service now? If we were designed for mining, what do we mine in the modern world? The extraction continues, but its nature has shifted. Perhaps we extract from ourselves, from each other, from the planet, creating value that flows upward through invisible channels to recipients we cannot identify. Or perhaps the original purpose has been transcended. Perhaps humanity has developed beyond its designed parameters, become something the Anunnaki did not anticipate and cannot fully control. Our creativity, our capacity for love and beauty and meaning, may represent emergent properties that emerged from the genetic template, but were not explicitly designed into it. In that case, we may be of interest to our creators not as servants, but as something new, an experiment that produced unexpected results, a creation that has become more than the sum of its programmed parts. They watch, perhaps, not to control, but to understand, curious about what their creation has become and what it might yet become. This more hopeful interpretation does not require abandoning the basic framework. We can acknowledge our origins in Anunnaki engineering while believing that what emerged from that engineering has value beyond its original purpose. Children often exceed their parents' expectations. Creations sometimes transcend their creator's intentions. We may be more than we were made to be. The choice of interpretation remains with each individual. The evidence permits multiple readings. The facts, such as they are, support various conclusions. What we make of the Anunnaki story depends on what we bring to it, what we need from it, what we are prepared to accept about ourselves and our place in the cosmos. But the story itself persists. Across millennia, across cultures, across the rise and fall of civilizations, the story of the sky gods who created humanity continues to be told. This persistence is itself evidence. Stories that serve no purpose fade. Stories that capture something true endure. The Anunnaki endure in human memory because something about them demands remembering. Perhaps they engineered this persistence, built into us a need to remember our creators. Perhaps the story survives because it is true, and truth has its own power to persist. Perhaps we simply cannot stop asking where we came from and what we are, and the Anunnaki story provides answers that no other source can match. Whatever the reason, you have now heard the story, the entire arc from Nibiru to the present shadow, from creation to the watching that continues. The story is now part of you, added to whatever you knew before, available for whatever use you choose to make of it. The night grows deeper. Sleep approaches if it has not already come. Let the story accompany you into rest, into dreams where other kinds of knowing may be possible. The Watchers watch, whether you believe in them or not. The truth remains true, whether you accept it or deny it. The Anunnaki disagreed among themselves about humanity's value and proper treatment. Those disagreements may continue, with different factions pursuing different agendas in our regard. We may have allies among our creators, and enemies as well. If you accept the possibility that the Anunnaki remain, watching from shadows, signs of their presence become visible everywhere. Not proof, but pattern. Not certainty, but suggestion. The evidence does not compel belief, but it invites attention. Consider the acceleration of human technology in recent centuries. After millennia of gradual development, suddenly exponential advancement. Was this purely human achievement? Or was knowledge introduced, guided, channeled toward specific outcomes? The technologies we have developed serve certain purposes remarkably well, while creating problems that may also serve purposes we do not understand. Consider the persistence of gold's value across all human cultures and throughout all recorded history. A metal whose practical utility does not justify its symbolic importance. We value gold because we were taught to value gold, because the beings who created us needed gold desperately, and wove that need into the foundations of our economic systems. The Anunnaki interest in specific human bloodlines extended beyond royal succession. Certain families were marked, their lineages tracked across generations, their genetic characteristics monitored for purposes that remain unclear. These were not always the obvious power holders, but sometimes obscure lines that carried specific genetic markers the Anunnaki valued. The biblical concept of being chosen takes on different meaning in this context. To be chosen was not primarily spiritual, but biological, the identification of genetic lines that carried desired traits. The covenant with Abraham established a bloodline that would be tracked, protected, and occasionally manipulated for thousands of years. The elaborate genealogies that fill ancient texts were not expressions of vanity, but records of genetic inheritance. Who begat whom mattered, because it tracked the flow of Anunnaki genes through human populations. The emphasis on marriage within approved groups ensured that specific genetic combinations would be preserved rather than diluted. Intermarriage with outsiders was prohibited, not for ethnic reasons, but for genetic ones. The purity being preserved was not cultural, but biological. The maintenance of gene combinations that had been carefully engineered and must not be degraded through random mating. The harsh penalties for violating these prohibitions reflected the seriousness with which the Anunnaki viewed genetic integrity. The concept of sacrifice takes on new meaning as well. The burning of offerings, the first fruits and finest animals presented to the gods, may have served purposes beyond symbolic worship. The smoke that rose from sacrificial fires contained genetic material. DNA samples that could be collected and analyzed by technology we do not possess. Regular sacrifice provided regular genetic sampling of human populations. The specific requirements for sacrificial animals, unblemished specimens of particular types, ensured the quality of the samples being collected. The elaborate rituals surrounding sacrifice were not mere superstition, but protocols ensuring that the genetic material remained viable for collection and analysis. The gods demanded sacrifice because the gods needed data. Human sacrifice, practiced in various cultures despite prohibitions, may have served similar purposes in more extreme form. The offering of human life provided complete genetic samples, entire organisms rather than partial material. The horror with which later traditions viewed human sacrifice may reflect Anunnaki disapproval of unauthorized collection of data that should flow through proper channels. The practice of circumcision, so central to Abrahamic tradition, may have genetic significance beyond the symbolic. The removal of specific tissue at a specific developmental stage could serve collection purposes, providing samples of each male in the covenant community. The timing at 8 days may reflect optimal conditions for whatever analysis was being performed. These interpretations are speculative, but consistent with the larger framework. If the Anunnaki created humanity through genetic engineering, they would logically maintain interest in how that genetic material evolved and distributed. The religious practices they established would serve practical purposes beyond their spiritual significance. The Anunnaki approach to human reproduction went beyond simple genetics. They understood consciousness, the relationship between physical brain structure and the awareness that emerges from it. They may have engineered not just bodies, but the capacity for specific forms of experience, shaping not just what humans are, but how humans perceive. The limitations of human perception may be designed rather than evolved. Our narrow window of visible light, our restricted range of audible sound, our limited capacity for sensing electromagnetic fields, all these constraints define our experience of reality. But other configurations were possible. We perceive what we were designed to perceive, no more. This has profound implications for understanding truth. Our senses report reality, but a reality filtered through perceptual limitations that were engineered into us. What we cannot perceive, we cannot know through direct experience. The universe may be filled with phenomena we are specifically designed not to detect. The Anunnaki themselves would presumably perceive differently. Their sensory apparatus, developed over millions of years of evolution on a different world, would give them access to aspects of reality invisible to humans. They might see what we cannot, hear what we cannot, know what we cannot. Their experience of the same universe fundamentally richer than ours. This sensory disparity would make their technology seem miraculous. These patterns persist across cultures and centuries, suggesting something more than coincidence at work in human development. The architecture of human consciousness itself may have been deliberately designed to serve purposes we are only beginning to understand through careful observation. Manipulating forces we cannot perceive looks like magic. Responding to information we cannot detect looks like prophecy. Their apparent supernatural powers may simply reflect natural capabilities beyond our engineered limitations. The human sense of the numinous, The feeling that something greater exists beyond ordinary perception may be accurate detection of what lies beyond our designed limitations. These patterns persist across cultures and centuries, suggesting something more than coincidence at work in human development. We sense the boundary of our perception, the edge where our engineered senses stop and something else continues. The spiritual longing that characterizes human experience may be homesickness for a fuller reality we were designed not to access. Religious experience across cultures shares common features that suggest genuine contact with something beyond ordinary reality. This understanding carries profound implications for how we perceive ourselves and our relationship to those who designed the foundations of human existence. The feeling of presence, the sense of expanded awareness, the temporary transcendence of normal limitations. These experiences may represent moments when the perceptual boundaries engineered into us temporarily become permeable. Meditation practices, psychedelic substances, extreme physical states, and spontaneous mystical experiences. This understanding carries profound implications for how we perceive ourselves and our relationship to those who designed the foundations of human existence. The evidence accumulates across cultures and centuries, pointing toward patterns too consistent to dismiss as mere coincidence or cultural borrowing. The consistency of the experiences across different triggers suggests they access something real rather than merely producing similar illusions. The designed limitations can be temporarily overcome, and when they are, humans perceive aspects of reality normally hidden from them. The Anunnaki may have been aware that such openings would occur. These patterns persist across cultures and centuries, suggesting something more than coincidence at work in human development. The genetic legacy of the Anunnaki intervention continues to express itself in ways both obvious and subtle, shaping human potential across all populations and generations. The limitations they engineered were perhaps not absolute, but merely default settings that could be adjusted under certain conditions. The religious and mystical traditions they established may have deliberately included methods for temporarily expanding perception, providing glimpses of the larger reality to those who achieved specific states. These glimpses would reinforce belief in the divine while maintaining ordinary limitations for most functions. These patterns persist across cultures and centuries, suggesting something more than coincidence at work in human development. The rare mystic who achieved expanded perception would return with testimony that supported religious authority. The occasional prophet who accessed broader awareness would deliver messages that served divine purposes. The limitations served their purpose, while allowing exceptions that also served. The modern decline of religious experience may reflect changes in how the limitations are maintained. As Anunnaki presence became less direct, the methods for inducing controlled perceptual openings may have degraded or been deliberately withdrawn. The modern human may be more tightly constrained than ancient humans, the permitted glimpses fewer and further between. Alternatively, the modern proliferation of information may serve similar purposes through different means. Where ancient humans received controlled, mystical experiences, modern humans receive controlled information flows. The sense of connection to something larger is provided not through direct perception, but through media that creates the feeling without the substance. The Anunnaki intervention in human development created a species with remarkable capabilities and significant limitations. We can think abstractly, create symbolically, plan across time spans that exceed our individual lives. We are capable of achievements that no other earthly species approaches. But we are also constrained in ways that keep those capabilities within bounds. The balance between capability and constraint was carefully calibrated. Too much limitation, and we could not serve the purposes for which we were created. Too little, and we might develop in ways that threatened our creators. The balance point was found and encoded in our genetics, producing a species that was useful without being dangerous. That balance may now be shifting. Human technology is developing capabilities that were not anticipated when the genetic template was established. We are approaching the ability to modify our own genetics, to enhance our capabilities beyond their designed parameters, to overcome the limitations that were engineered into us. How the Watchers respond to these developments remains to be seen. The genetic legacy of the Anunnaki intervention continues to express itself in ways both obvious and subtle across all human populations. Their vigilance has not wavered across the millennia, patient beyond human comprehension, attentive to developments we ourselves barely notice unfolding around us. They may intervene to prevent changes that threaten the established order. They may allow changes that serve purposes we do not understand. They may be as surprised by human development as we are, their ancient engineering producing results they did not predict. The coming decades may determine whether humanity remains within designed parameters or breaks free of them. These patterns persist across cultures and centuries, suggesting something more than coincidence at work in human development. Such understanding was carefully guarded across generations, shared only with those deemed worthy and capable of using it responsibly for the benefit of those who watch. Our choices in these matters may be the most consequential in our entire history as a species. What we decide about genetic enhancement, artificial intelligence, and consciousness modification may define what humanity becomes for the remainder of our existence. The Anunnaki story provides context for these choices. If we were designed with limitations, should we accept them as features or overcome them as bugs? If our creators intended us to perceive narrowly, should we respect their design or expand beyond it? If we were made to serve, do we have the right to choose other purposes? These are not merely philosophical questions, but practical ones, with real consequences. The answers we choose will shape the human future in ways that cannot be undone. The story of our past, if we understand it correctly, illuminates the stakes of our present decisions. The shadows from which the Anunnaki watch are growing longer as night deepens. Whatever they see as they observe human development, whatever judgments they make about our trajectory, whatever interventions they may be planning, all of this occurs in a darkness we cannot penetrate. We know we are watched, but not what the watching reveals to those who watch. Perhaps they are pleased by human development, gratified that their creation has exceeded its original design specifications. Perhaps they are concerned, worried that humanity is becoming something they cannot control. Perhaps they are simply curious, observing without judgment, waiting to see what emerges from the experiment they initiated so long ago. Their timeline is not ours. What seems urgent to us may seem trivial to them. What seems permanent to us may seem temporary from their perspective. The entire modern era, from the Industrial Revolution to the present, occupies less than a tenth of a single Anunnaki year. Our frantic pace of change is barely perceptible to observers operating on that timescale. This disparity in temporal experience makes communication difficult and interpretation unreliable. What we interpret as Anunnaki indifference to human suffering may simply reflect different time perception. A crisis that lasts a human generation lasts a few days in their experience. Response times appropriate to their perception would seem glacially slow from ours. The promise of divine return, present in so many traditions, may be precisely timed from the Anunnaki perspective, even as it seems endlessly delayed from ours. They said they would return, and from their perspective, they will return soon. That soon simply takes thousands of years to arrive in human time. When and how that return might occur remains unknown. The ancient prophecies provide clues, but not certainties. The signs and portents that are supposed to precede the return could be interpreted many ways. Every generation has found evidence that the time is near, and every generation has been wrong so far. But every generation cannot be wrong forever. If the Anunnaki cycle is real, if Nibiru does approach on its 3,600-year orbit, then at some point the return will occur. This understanding carries profound implications for how we perceive ourselves and our relationship to those who designed the foundations of human existence. The delay so far does not disprove the prediction, only demonstrates that the timing exceeds human expectation. The signs we should watch for, according to various traditions, include technological development reaching critical tipping points, certain thresholds, human population reaching critical tipping points, certain levels, environmental conditions reaching critical tipping points. This understanding carries profound implications for how we perceive ourselves and our relationship to those who designed the foundations of human existence. Many of these conditions appear to be approaching or already present in the modern world. If the interpretations are correct, we may be closer to the return than any previous generation. What the return would mean depends on perspectives and preparations we cannot fully anticipate. For those who have maintained connection to Anunnaki traditions, it might mean vindication and reward. For those who have rejected or ignored those traditions, it might mean judgment and consequence. For humanity as a whole, it would mean the end of one era and the beginning of another. The modern world, for all its secular appearances, may be preparing for this transition without conscious awareness. The global communication systems that could announce a return simultaneously everywhere. The surveillance networks that could monitor human response to such an announcement. The financial systems that could be restructured by a new authority. The military capabilities that could enforce compliance or resist it. All of these developments could be coincidental, the natural evolution of human technology driven by purely human motivations. Or they could be preparation, infrastructure established in advance of events that informed parties anticipate. The ambiguity is itself significant. Either explanation is possible, and the truth may combine elements of both. The story settles toward its conclusion, though the conclusion is not an ending. The Anunnaki story has no ending, because the Anunnaki have not ended. If they exist and watch, their story continues in real time, each moment adding to a narrative that extends backward to the creation of our species and forward to whatever destiny awaits us. You who listen in the darkness are part of this story. Your existence is not random but intended, not accidental but designed. Your life is observed by intelligences whose nature and purposes remain partially hidden. Your choices matter not just to you, but to watchers whose interest in human development has spanned the entire duration of our species' existence. This should not be frightening, but clarifying. To know that your life matters beyond its individual significance, that your existence serves purposes larger than personal satisfaction, that you are part of a story that began before your birth and continues after your death. This knowledge places individual experience in a larger context that can provide meaning and direction. The Anunnaki, if they exist, are not opponents of human flourishing, but its original sponsors. They created us because they needed us. But creation itself implies value. We matter to them because we are useful. But useful things are maintained, protected, allowed to develop their potential. Our relationship with our creators, whatever its complications, is not one of pure exploitation. Sleep approaches, if it has not already arrived. Let these considerations settle into the quiet of rest. The story will keep whether you remain awake to hear it or not. The Anunnaki watch whether you believe in them or not. The truth persists regardless of human acceptance or rejection. The shadows hold their secrets. The night holds its mysteries. Somewhere in the darkness, attention focuses on this world, and perhaps on this moment. The relationship between human consciousness and Anunnaki engineering may be more intimate than simple creation. If they designed our neural architecture, they designed how we think, what we can think, and what remains beyond our cognitive capacity. The boundaries of human thought are not natural limits, but engineered parameters, constraints that served their purposes and may still serve purposes we do not recognize. Every thought we think occurs within architecture they designed. The architecture of awareness itself may have been deliberately designed to serve purposes we are only beginning to understand. Dreams may provide access to layers of consciousness that waking awareness cannot reach. Perceptions filtered out by design during normal operation. The universal human experience of dreaming suggests a fundamental feature rather than an accident, a built-in capacity for altered perception that the Anunnaki included for reasons of their own making. What we dream may be as real as what we perceive while awake, perhaps more real in ways we cannot measure. The architecture of awareness itself may have been deliberately designed to serve purposes we are only beginning to understand. The phenomenon of inspiration, the sudden arrival of ideas and solutions from unknown sources, may represent communication through channels that bypass normal cognition. Artists, scientists, inventors, and prophets throughout history have described receiving rather than creating, as if thoughts came from elsewhere. Perhaps they did come from elsewhere, transmitted by entities who find this method useful for guiding human development without direct intervention. These patterns persist across cultures and centuries, suggesting something more than coincidence at work in human development. The consistency of religious and mystical experiences across cultures and centuries suggests genuine contact with something beyond ordinary perception. The light, the presence, the sense of expanded awareness, the feeling of coming home to something always known but forgotten. These experiences are not pathology, but perception, glimpses of what lies beyond the designed limitations that normally constrain human awareness to its narrow band. These patterns persist across cultures and centuries, suggesting something more than coincidence at work in human development. Human creativity exceeds what our design parameters would seem to require. We create beauty that serves no survival purpose, meaning that has no practical utility. Art that expresses something beyond communication. This creative surplus may be emergence, capabilities that develop from the genetic template but were not explicitly designed into it, surprising even those who created us, and perhaps delighting them with unexpected development. The genetic legacy of the Anunnaki intervention continues to express itself in ways both obvious and subtle across all human populations. The human capacity for love similarly exceeds apparent design requirements. The depth of connection we can achieve with other beings, the willingness to sacrifice for others, the joy we find in relationship. These capabilities serve species survival, but feel like more than mere evolutionary strategy. Perhaps they represent something the Anunnaki hoped we would develop, but could not engineer directly. Emergent properties that exceed their design capabilities. These patterns persist across cultures and centuries, suggesting something more than coincidence at work in human development. Music affects human consciousness in ways that suggest deep engineering. Specific frequencies, rhythms, and harmonies produce reliable emotional and cognitive effects. This responsiveness seems designed rather than accidental, a feature built into human neural architecture for purposes that may include communication, influence, or control of states of consciousness by those who understand the system and know which frequencies activate which responses. The architecture of awareness itself may have been deliberately designed to serve purposes we are only beginning to understand. Language shapes thought in ways that may have been deliberately designed. The grammatical structures that organize our thinking, the conceptual categories that language makes available, the limits of what can be expressed in words. The Sumerian language was given to humanity, according to tradition, and the structures of that gift continue to influence how we process reality across all subsequent languages and dialects. These patterns persist across cultures and centuries, suggesting something more than coincidence at work in human development. The human relationship with time may be engineered as well. Our perception of time as linear, our limited access to memory and anticipation, our inability to perceive duration directly. These constraints on temporal perception serve specific purposes, keeping human awareness focused on the present moment, where productive work occurs, rather than wandering into pasts or futures where physical labor does not happen. This understanding shifts the foundation of human self-perception in profound and lasting ways. The boundaries between individual human consciousnesses may be more permeable than ordinary perception suggests. Phenomena like telepathy, shared dreams, and group consciousness experiences point to connections that the Anunnaki may have included in the design. We are individuals, but we are also networked, connected in ways that ordinary awareness does not recognize, but that may serve coordination purposes at levels below conscious awareness. The architecture of awareness itself may have been deliberately designed to serve purposes we are only beginning to understand. The near-death experience, reported so consistently across cultures and circumstances, may reveal something about the architecture of consciousness that normal life conceals. The tunnel, the light, the life review, the encounter with presences. These consistent features suggest design rather than hallucination, a structured experience that serves purposes beyond individual death, perhaps recycling or redirecting the awareness that inhabited the dying body. The architecture of awareness itself may have been deliberately designed to serve purposes we are only beginning to understand. Human sexuality was certainly engineered, the capacity for reproduction that Enki secretly added to the original design. But sexuality serves purposes beyond reproduction, creating bonds between individuals, generating energy that can be channeled, producing states of consciousness that open otherwise closed perceptions. The engineering of sexuality may be more complex than simple reproductive capability, serving multiple functions. The architecture of awareness itself may have been deliberately designed to serve purposes we are only beginning to understand. The human need for meaning may be the most fundamental aspect of our design. We cannot function well without a sense of purpose, a reason for existence, a story that explains our place in the larger order of things. This need may be deliberate, ensuring that humans would accept the meanings their creators provided, rather than drifting into purposeless nihilism that would impair their usefulness. These patterns persist across cultures and centuries, suggesting something more than coincidence at work in human development. The Anunnaki themselves may face questions of meaning that parallel our own spiritual seeking. What is the purpose of their existence? What story gives their activities significance? The creation of humanity may have been partly an attempt to address such questions, to create meaning through the act of creation, to matter by making beings to whom the concept of mattering has emotional and existential weight. These patterns persist across cultures and centuries, suggesting something more than coincidence at work in human development. The recursive nature of this inquiry is itself significant. We question our origins, and those questions lead us back to beings who may have had similar questions about their own origins. Consciousness questioning itself may be a fundamental feature of sufficiently developed awareness, something that emerges whenever awareness becomes complex enough to reflect on its own existence, whether in Anunnaki or human or other form. The architecture of awareness itself may have been deliberately designed to serve purposes we are only beginning to understand. The future of humanity remains unwritten, or at least unread by human eyes. Whatever plans the Anunnaki have for our species, whatever interventions they contemplate, whatever judgment they will eventually render on our development and trajectory, all remains hidden in the shadows from which they watch. We move toward a future that may be as deliberately designed as our past was deliberately engineered. Their vigilance has not wavered across the millennia, patient beyond human comprehension, attentive to developments we ourselves barely notice. The possibility of human agency within designed parameters presents interesting philosophical questions. Even if our capabilities were engineered by others, the choices we make with those capabilities are our own. The Anunnaki created the instrument, but we play the music. Our creative use of designed features may produce outcomes our creators did not anticipate and cannot control. Genuine freedom within structured constraints. These patterns persist across cultures and centuries, suggesting something more than coincidence at work in human development. The evolution of human consciousness over recent millennia may represent development the Anunnaki intended all along, or emergence they did not predict and cannot fully control. Either way, we are not the same beings who were created to work the mines of ancient Africa. We have developed, grown, become something more than our original design specifications. That development continues with each passing generation. This understanding shifts the foundation of human self-perception in profound and lasting ways. The question of Anunnaki motivation remains central to understanding their continued interest in human affairs. If the gold crisis on Nibiru has been resolved, why maintain presence on Earth at all? Perhaps their investment in humanity has evolved beyond its original purpose, creating obligations and interests that persist regardless of the original mission parameters. The relationship that began as resource extraction may have transformed into something far more complex over the millennia of ongoing observation. The possibility that the Anunnaki themselves have changed over the millennia cannot be dismissed as mere speculation or wishful thinking. Civilizations evolve across vast timescales, priorities shift with changing circumstances, and what began as resource extraction may have transformed into something else entirely. Their relationship with humanity may now be as complex and multifaceted as any long-term relationship between peoples with intertwined histories and countless generations of shared experience. The concept of cosmic law or universal principle appears in Anunnaki texts and may govern their interactions with developing species throughout the cosmos and across countless worlds. Certain interventions may be prohibited by such laws, others required by cosmic ethics, and the balance between guidance and interference, carefully regulated by standards we do not fully comprehend. Their apparent restraint may reflect not indifference, but compliance with higher-order constraints that bind even the most advanced civilizations to codes of conduct. Human potential may exceed Anunnaki expectations in ways that create both profound opportunities and legitimate concerns for the future relationship between our species. A creation that shows signs of surpassing its creator presents philosophical and practical challenges that even advanced civilizations must navigate with great care and wisdom. The future relationship between humanity and the Anunnaki may depend on how both species choose to respond to this evolving dynamic, as human capabilities continue to expand beyond original parameters. Consider the structures of power that maintain themselves regardless of political revolution or social change. Elites persist across regime transitions, their wealth and influence surviving catastrophes that destroy ordinary populations. Are they simply clever, or are they connected to something that ensures their continuity? Consider the direction of human development, the choices that seem to be made for us before we know we are choosing. Population concentrated in urban centers where it can be monitored. Communication systems that record everything we say and do. Economies that bind us to debt from birth. These patterns could be emergent, or they could be designed. Intellectual honesty requires acknowledging the alternative, that none of this is true. The Anunnaki may be purely mythological, no different from Zeus or Odin, or any other divine figure that human imagination has created to explain what science had not yet revealed. The ancient texts may record not history, but psychology. projections of human need onto an indifferent cosmos. The patterns we see may be pareidolia, the tendency of pattern-seeking minds to find connections where none exist. The feeling of being watched may be nothing more than evolved vigilance that served our ancestors, but misleads us now. This skeptical position has its own form of dignity. It refuses comfortable stories in favor of harder truths. It insists on evidence rather than accepting suggestion. It demands that extraordinary claims meet extraordinary standards of proof. The honest answer is that we do not know. The evidence permits belief, but does not compel it. The patterns suggest presence, but do not prove it. Each person must evaluate the evidence and draw their own conclusions, accepting responsibility for the worldview they choose to inhabit. But the question matters regardless of the answer. If the Anunnaki exist and watch, knowing changes how we live. If they do not, the story still illuminates something important about human nature, our need for origin, for meaning, for connection to something larger than our individual lives. As sleep approaches, these considerations can settle into quiet rest. The story has been told, the entire arc from Nibiru to now, from creation to the present moment where you listen in darkness. Whether you believe or doubt, the story connects you to everyone who has heard some version of it across the millennia. The Sumerians who first inscribed these accounts in clay, the Babylonians who preserved and modified them, the biblical writers who adapted them, the modern researchers who translated and interpreted them. You join a chain of transmission that stretches back to the very events described. Not the facts of those events, perhaps, but the meaning humans have found in telling and retelling this story. The meaning of origin, of purpose, of hope for return. The Anunnaki, if they watch you now. They have watched your ancestors and will watch your descendants. Their timeline extends beyond your life as yours extends beyond a single breath. You are a moment in their observation, but moments matter to those who create them. Or they are nothing, and you rest in a universe that neither watches nor cares. In that case, you are free in ways the watched can never be, but also alone in ways they never experience. Freedom and loneliness, observation and meaning, the choice of interpretation is yours. This has been the entire story of the Anunnaki, from their dying world to ours, from creation to the shadows where they may still watch. It is a story that does not end because its subjects may still be active, still observing, still invested in how the human story continues. If you carry anything forward from this night, let it be attention, the habit of noticing patterns, the willingness to question official narratives, the openness to possibilities that consensus dismisses. Not belief without evidence, but investigation without prejudice. The Anunnaki story invites this attention because it connects everything: our origin, our history, our institutions, our future. If true, it explains why things are as they are. If false, it reveals what we wish were true and why we wish it. Either way, it illuminates. Sleep now, if sleep is coming. Let the story settle into dreams where other kinds of knowing may occur. The watchers, if they watch, have watched humans sleep since sleep first came to our kind. You rest under the same eyes that watched the first Lulu close their eyes in the shadow of Anunnaki towers. Or you rest alone, observed only by the darkness itself, free in your solitude, sovereign in your dreaming. Either way, you rest. Either way, morning will come. Either way, the questions will remain. They are watching from the shadows. Or the shadows are empty, and we tell stories to fill them. The night holds its secrets. The ancient ones hold theirs. Sleep well, and wake to wonder what you believe. Good night. Rest deep, and remember, the story that explains your existence is older than any human memory, written in stars and clay and genetic code. They have waited ages already. They can wait until you wake.